Hi there. I split this off from a longer video because I want to keep it short and focused on one specific question. Was King Jaehaerys Targaryen a misogynist, and this is why he kept passing over his eldest grandchild, Rhaenys, as heir to the Iron Throne? People keep asking me this in the comments, and after a careful rereading of Fire and Blood, I actually don't think so. Short version, he had two sons who had children of their own. Elder son Aemon had one child, Rhaenys, before he died, and the second son, Balon, had two sons of his own, Viserys and younger son Daemon. What happened was Aemon died in a random skirmish with pirates in the year 92 AC, and instead of Rhaenys being his heir under every law of the Andals in Westeros, Jaehaerys instead named his second son as heir to the Iron Throne, Balon. Inheritance law doesn't work like that. That is not primogeniture. Primogeniture means until your bloodline is exhausted. That it went from Aemon to his daughter. Only if Rhaenys died would it then go to his younger brother. That under primogeniture, a lord's younger brother would only inherit after a daughter. Balon inheriting directly from Aemon, like that's called male proximity. That's not primogeniture, and no one does that. But as the book says at the time, the bigger factor was Balon was a popular lord with everyone, with the commons, with the commoners. Everyone really liked him for avenging his brother's death on the pirates. They burned out a lot of them. He was a great administrator, and he was older and had sons of his own. Whereas Rhaenys was an 18-year-old girl and married to Corlys Velaryon. And she only had the prospect of future heirs. She was pregnant. Who knew if the child would live, because that's a common thing. As it later turned out, it was a girl, Laena, but they didn't know that at the time. Passed over. But then, years later, Balon died of a burst appendix. This time, Rhaenys had a second child, now a son, Laenor, and it was hazy enough of, well, it's distant enough from him, it's not even a son now, it's a grandson. Balon's son, Viserys, is the candidate. There were enough people supporting the Velaryons that there was fear of a civil war, so Jaehaerys called the Great Council to decide. He wanted Viserys, because he had wanted Balon. But they called the Great Council, and Viserys won by a factor of 20-1. So the question is Jaehaerys for supporting first Balon and then Viserys over the female line to Laenor, is this because he's a misogynist? It doesn't really say that. That, first off, when it talks about naming Balon ahead of Rhaenys, this was not a snap personal decision. Fire and Blood makes it clear. It says, we know from records that he discussed this at length with his small council. This was a decision of state that he made with his advisors, not a temperamental, personal decision. And it lists off reasons both times, and I think the point Martin kept making, George R. R. Martin, all politics is local. You know? That a major point he's had about, like, law in the Middle Ages was never ironclad. It was never about ironclad precedents. It was always about needs of the moment, and it shifted constantly. That the simple matter is, I don't think Jaehaerys was meant to be, in Martin's view, because obviously this isn't real, Martin's intending it, that Jaehaerys wasn't thinking about precedent. What he wanted was who would be the best candidate in the moment. And looking at it, he thought Balon would be a more fit monarch as an older and established lord than Rhaenys, who was an 18-year-old girl. Later on, the same thing was repeated to a greater extent at the Great Council itself, which we'll see on screen in House of the Dragon. Viserys was, while not quite, the great warrior his father was, he was an adult man, educated, well-liked, good-tempered administrator, who even was married and had a child of his own. He had Rhaenyra, would presumably have other children. And Laenor was a 7-year-old boy. That people don't want a child on the throne because opportunistic rebellions would pop up, that this happens all the time at the lordship level, that Roose Bolton remarks in the books that child heirs are the bane of houses, that the vassals will revolt because they know that there's going to be a period of weakness. Happens all the time. So regardless of claim, but their personal attributes, that it's the point is, these aren't people who vote along party lines, but are like the fabled independent voter who votes based on the strength and weakness of the particular candidates, regardless of party. But in this case, by party, I mean, what inheritance system are they claiming under? That they were simply the stronger candidate. And on top of this, so it's stronger candidate in both cases, Jaehaerys didn't make a personal decision. He asked his small council. I think the problem is not Jaehaerys himself, but that Jaehaerys accurately gauged, and was also his small council gauged, that Westeros as a whole might be patriarchal, the patriarchy, and even though technically under male preference primogeniture, Aemon's daughter should still inherit ahead of his younger brother, I think he accurately gauged in 92 AC, when Aemon died, that there are lords who would seize on this as an opportunity to rebel against the Targaryens just because Rhaenys is a woman. And as we later saw at the secret ballot of the Great Council, yeah, she lost by her bloodline through Laenor, lost by 20-1. And maybe different people had different reasons for voting, that it's because he's a boy. But I don't think it's Jaehaerys himself necessarily, as he put the survival of the dynasty ahead of the actual rules. It's like when a political party, could be either political party, says to a female candidate, look, the voters are misogynists. It is risky to run you as a candidate, even though you are the most qualified, because according to our polling data, a woman is more likely to lose this election. And I'm not a misogynist, I'm saying the electorate is misogynist. Maybe we shouldn't give you our backing. And that is cold political calculus you need to make. Should we run a woman, it might compromise our party as a whole. I'm mixing my metaphors here with political parties and dynasties, but it's still, maybe Jaehaerys, I think accurately, gauged that they would face another rebellion. Keeping in mind that Jaehaerys, he was a small boy, he was 10, but he lived through the Faith Militant Uprising. He became king when he was 14 at the end of it, but this nearly destroyed the Targaryens. That for him, a rebellion to overthrow the Targaryens was a real possibility. Then we have to factor in all the new stuff from House of the Dragon, which may have been a thing. Obviously, out of universe, Martin did this retroactively. And publicly said, well, why did they pass over the female candidate? He said, well, I based it on the anarchy in England between Stephen and Matilda, and in real life. Well, ask them, why did they favor Stephen instead of Matilda in the anarchy in the 1130s in England? But, okay, retconning this in universe, maybe Martin's thing is, I talked about this in a separate video. He's remarked in a recent interview on that they're revealing that prophecy of that Aegon the Conqueror really invaded and united Westeros because of a prophetic dream, that the White Walkers are coming back. And Martin specified that he didn't know it would come in 300 years. So every Targaryen monarch that knew of this prophecy thought it was going to be happening relatively soon, in the immediate future, if not in their own lifetime, then in the lifetime of their child. This might be an attempt to retcon it, but maybe it's Jaehaerys was worried that what if the White Walkers come back in the next generation? I'd rather have Balon leading our armies as this male leader that they would all unite behind than, from a point of practicality, there's some male lords who wouldn't think Rhaenys was capable of leading them. And similarly, Laenor is a boy. What if the White Walkers come back? So he was terrified of that, and obviously that came in later, that's a retcon, but the idea of don't leave the dynasty in a precarious position under a child or a woman whose leadership would be questioned. Because on the other hand, have we ever had a situation where there was a young boy king and a much more experienced older female heir who was put ahead of him? Sometimes that happens, and I could cite examples from the lords, but I want to keep this under 10 minutes here. but I really think it was due to pragmatism, and I think you could say Jaehaerys was like that political election campaigner going, the electorate are misogynists, we shouldn't run a woman against, she would lose. He himself was not, because also doing a close reading of all of this, Jaehaerys spoiled his daughters rotten. I mean, often, like Alyssa, who is Viserys and Daemon's mother, she was a tomboy. She was rode her own dragon, was very rough and tumble, got into fights with knights. She was really fun, very overtly sexual, and like they could hear her screams on her wedding night throughout the castle. That he didn't ask her to act ladylike. That isn't a thing. He did expect his other daughter. She married Balon, who was also kind of a wild child, but his younger daughters he wanted to pressure to marry, but just to keep them controlled or something. But well, Dela, it's because he was worried about her and overcompensated, but I think that's not because she was a girl as such. And Sarah, when you reread the Sarah sections, the one who was sleeping around when they tried to punish her, she fled to the free cities to run her own whorehouse. He was the good cop. It says that very clearly. That because Sarah was such a manipulative liar that they said only Queen Alysanne really saw through that. That Jaehaerys, oh, Daddy, I'm just fooling around, and he'd believe her. That's why I think he got so hard against her when the full extent of her betrayal became clear. It's, I was the good cop, I took your side, and you took advantage of my trust. Whereas Alysanne, the one who had always been, we need to rein in Sarah, she's manipulating everyone, she was the one begging, we need to go to Lys and get her back, we need to forgive her, because she's still our daughter, that the roles reversed that way. But no, until the point we all remember the banishment. Not that the banishment was because of the betrayal, that I was the one spoiling you and defending you and giving you free reign of the castle. So just looking at the way he handled his, they go, oh, he didn't handle his daughters well. Not because he was misogynist, but because he was the good cop. He was the dad who spoiled them. Most of the time, we can debate, well, he wanted them to marry, but that's their society. But look at Alyssa. You know, she was not some model of the demure feminine ideal. So I don't really see evidence of him being a misogynist both in person and when the point where it says, no, he discussed it with his small council and they agreed it needs to be Balon. This was not a snap decision. And I think it's just the needs of the dynasty he was putting ahead of precedent. And that's why all of this happened. I don't think it was Jaehaerys against a woman, but still, why did all these other lords vote against her? Even those who did, such as the Starks voted for Rhaenys, or for Laenor, through her, because they wanted a political favor, because they were angry at Jaehaerys about the New Gift land deal, which I could spend another 15 minutes talking on, but I already have a separate video. The Baratheons voted for her because she was half Baratheon, on her mother's side. So all politics is local. It's just the point here is realpolitik. It came down to specific reasons. And even when I look at, I'm going to make a separate video on this, the Blacks and the Greens, the Velaryon camp and the Hightower camp during the Civil War. There's the Velaryon Targaryens, the Hightower Targaryens. I think the Blacks and the Greens were most, it's easy to say, well, it was the patriarchy, but no, there were also many trade factors, both local and international. But people don't want to hear about that. That it's the Velaryons for the first century of Targaryen rule were the right hand of the Targaryens, and other families were starting to get jealous of that maybe we should have a turn at being the next in line heir to the throne family. That they were wary that Corlys Velaryon is the richest man in the realm. I'm politically opposed to him because I'm not the richest. Maybe I don't want his wife on the throne. So whenever there's power, there's people out of power. And I think the people voting against Rhaenys weren't so much against her as a woman, but anti-Velaryon. From, like, the older power groups, like the original Andal aristocrats who were displaced by now all these Valyrian families, like the Baratheons and the Velaryons for the first century after the conquest, were in the places of power, whereas if you look at the Greens, they're the people who were out of power, like the Lannisters and the Hightowers, who were annoyed that the Velaryons were this new money family that were running everything. They were old money who felt slighted. Why would they vote for Rhaenys Velaryon? So I don't think it was their misogyny. Even for them, it might not have been misogyny, but local political factors. Then we hate women. This might surprise you that this is such a woke show. I think they convinced themselves within the story it's about they wouldn't let a woman rule. Similarly, well, Martin himself said, well, it's because of what happened in real life more than a commentary on the patriarchy. Why was Matilda not, why was she opposed by half of the lords of England siding with Stephen? Probably because they wanted political favors from Stephen. I don't really think that they fought wars based on such matters of principle, but who can scratch my back if I scratch theirs? So I do not think that Jaehaerys in character or in action was particularly a misogynist. He was worried about the long-term stability, but within the next generation, I can't leave this to a child heir or to a woman who would face rebellions just because she is a woman. And that's generally my view on this, and we'll see how House of the Dragon reflects this, if they interpret it or if they present it in this more nuanced way, which I think I would submit entire essays on this. I don't think the Dance of the Dragons was actually due to patriarchy. I think it was due to complex political factions in a world of real politic.